There's a kind of fear that doesn't scream. It doesn't show up suddenly, doesn't make you jump out of your chair, doesn't chase you through nightmares full of sharp-toothed monsters. This fear arrives slowly, like fog rolling down the pine-covered slopes of Flagstaff, Arizona, silent, damp, seeping through the cracks before you realize you're already completely surrounded. It's the fear of something you can't name. The fear of something the police investigated, documented, and then closed the file on without giving the public a single satisfying answer. The fear of Marcus Thompson. Marcus was 33 years old when the first reports started coming into the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. He wasn't the kind of man you'd picture at the center of a story like this. He was an accountant, worked at a modest office on Milton Road, paid his taxes on time, called his mother every Sunday. The neighbors described him as quiet, not in a disturbing way, just reserved. The kind of man who nods when he passes you on the sidewalk but never stops to chat. The kind you forget 5 minutes after crossing paths with him. But there was something in Marcus's eyes that people rarely managed to describe with any precision. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was a kind of permanent tension, as if he were holding something inside his chest with both hands, with all the strength he had, and knew that at some point his hands were going to give out. Those who knew him well said he seemed like someone carrying an invisible weight, a weight that didn't add up in pounds, but that bent his shoulders just the same. Flagstaff sits at over 7,000 feet of elevation. In winter, snow covers the pines, and the whole world feels too quiet to be real. In summer, storms roll in during the afternoon with lightning that tears across the sky in a way that feels personal, as if nature were trying to hit something specific. And at night, when clouds cover the moon, the town goes dark in a way coastal towns never do. A thick, ancient darkness that reminds you that before the street lights and sidewalks, this was forest, territory belonging to something else. It was in that darkness that the first witnesses saw something they couldn't explain. And it was in that darkness that Marcus Thompson started disappearing from home at night, without a trace, without an explanation to anyone, and always coming back before dawn, with his shirt torn and his eyes full of an expression none of the people around him knew how to interpret, an expression that mixed relief and terror in equal parts, like someone who survived something he shouldn't have survived, or who did something he shouldn't have done. The first official report is written in bureaucratic language that clashes violently with what it describes. The report mentions an unidentified sighting near Highway 89, a large animal exhibiting atypical behavior, and ground markings inconsistent with known local wildlife. Whoever wrote that was clearly struggling to fit what the witnesses reported into the limits of the department's standard form. Because what the witnesses reported didn't fit into any standard form. Two drivers traveling the highway in opposite directions stopped almost simultaneously. Both reported seeing a figure on the shoulder, initially identified as a human being, based on its upright posture and facial features. But when the headlights lit up the figure more clearly, both drivers described the same thing, independently of each other. A being that looked like a man but wasn't entirely a man, dark hair combed back, like someone who had left the house looking put together. Human eyes. This detail was repeated by both of them with an emphasis that unsettled investigators. completely human eyes, full of something one of the drivers described as pain and the other described as rage. Maybe both of them were right. The nose and mouth looked deformed, jutting slightly forward with visible fangs that belonged to no known human anatomy. The skin was human, pale, with sparse hair scattered irregularly like patches. The orange shirt was torn, hanging off the torso as if something had grown from inside the fabric and burst the seams. One hand was raised, fingers ending in claws that gleamed under the headlights. The other hand was pressed against its own chest, with a force that seemed desperate, as if the creature were trying to hold in something coming from inside. Both drivers sped off. Neither of them slept well for weeks afterward. Police found marks on the ground at the shoulder of the road. Marks that the forensic examiner described in his report as footprints of ambiguous morphology, length consistent with an adult human biped, but with a depth and extremity shape suggesting significantly greater body mass and a non-human plantar structure. In simpler terms, the marks belonged to something that walked on 2 feet like a man, but was too heavy and too wide to be one. Marcus Thompson lived less than 2 miles from that stretch of highway. That alone meant nothing. Flagstaff isn't a huge city, but when investigators cross-referenced the timing of the sightings with nearby security camera footage, they found something that made them pause. On every single night a report came in, there was a gap in the footage from the security camera at the gas station closest to Marcus's house. Not a documented technical malfunction, just hours that simply weren't there. As if someone, or something, knew exactly where not to be seen. The detective in charge of the case, a man named Ray Whitfield, who had 22 years on the job and genuine pride in never having left a case without a satisfying answer, started pulling on that thread with the careful methodology that defined his work. He didn't know yet what that thread was attached to, didn't know that by pulling it, he'd be opening something that couldn't be closed back up. Marcus Thompson knew something was wrong with him. Long before any sighting, long before any police report, long before any security camera recorded a gap in time. He'd known ever since he woke up in a field 4 miles from home, his feet caked with dirt and blood that wasn't his on his hands. With no memory at all of how he'd gotten there, he woke up looking at a sky just starting to lighten, and the first thought that came wasn't panic. It was a kind of quiet, terrifying recognition, as if some part of him already knew exactly what had happened and was simply waiting for the rest of him to catch up. That was the beginning. But the beginning of what exactly, Marcus couldn't articulate even to himself. He tried to find rational explanations. Sleepwalking, dissociative episodes, severe anxiety attacks he'd been ignoring for too long. He looked into medical conditions that could cause memory loss and nighttime behavior. He got tests done. The results came back normal, which was somehow more frightening than any diagnosis would have been, because a diagnosis would have given it a name. And what was happening to Marcus Thompson had no name, or had a name no doctor would ever write on a chart. What Marcus remembered in the fragments that survived the barrier between what he was and what he became at night were sensations more than images. Heat, unbearable pressure coming from inside his own body, as if his skin were too small. A rage that didn't belong to any specific thought. Rage without an object. Rage as an element. The way fire isn't angry at anything but burns just the same. And alongside the rage, a pain that was also power, a contradiction that made no sense at all in ordinary language, but that Marcus felt as the most real thing he had ever experienced. He started taking precautions. He locked his bedroom door from the inside. He tied his wrists to the headboard with climbing webbing he bought at the outdoor store in town, strong enough to hold over 200 pounds of force. The first night he tried it, he woke up with the webbing torn into 4 pieces, his wrists unharmed, and the bedroom window open. A window he was absolutely certain he had closed and locked before going to sleep. People around Marcus noticed changes they couldn't pin down precisely. His supervisor at the office mentioned to a coworker that Marcus seemed different in the days following his nighttime absences, not disturbed exactly, but altered, as if something had been rearranged inside him without anyone's permission. There was an intensity in his eyes on those particular days that made people look away without knowing why. An animal instinct not to hold eye contact for too long. Here's the most disturbing thing of all, the piece that doesn't fit into any convenient explanation. Marcus didn't want to hurt anyone. That's essential to understanding what came next. The horror of Marcus Thompson's story isn't in the creature he became. It's in the man he kept being while the creature existed, conscious enough to be afraid, powerless enough to be unable to stop it. The hand pressed against his own chest wasn't a threatening gesture. It was containment. It was a man trying, with whatever was left of his will, to hold inside himself something that no longer fit. Ray Whitfield was the kind of investigator who solved cases through patience and method, not dramatic intuition. He built theories from facts, not the other way around. So when he started putting together the timeline of sightings and noticed they all followed a lunar pattern, his first reaction wasn't shock. It was intellectual discomfort, because Ray Whitfield didn't believe in lunar patterns. He didn't believe in anything that couldn't be photographed, weighed, and presented to a jury in objective language. But the numbers didn't lie. Every sighting, every documented incident, every gap in the security footage, all of it clustered around specific points in the lunar cycle. Ray Whitfield stared at that information for a long time, sitting at his desk at the station with photographs spread out in front of him, and then did what every good investigator does when the facts contradict the theory. He set the theory aside and kept following the facts. The connection to Marcus Thompson came through an unexpected path. A shop owner who worked near Marcus's office mentioned in casual conversation with an officer who was collecting statements about a completely different matter that he'd seen Marcus walking out toward the trails near the national park on a night the shopkeeper remembered well because of an unusual storm. The time the shopkeeper mentioned lined up with the timing of one of the sightings. The officer wrote it down. The note made its way to Whitfield. The detective went to visit Marcus Thompson on a weekday afternoon, unannounced, using the excuse of checking on resident reports of suspicious animal activity in the area. Marcus welcomed him into the living room, offered coffee, sat across the table with his hands open on his knees, the posture of someone with nothing to hide, or of someone who had practiced hard at looking like he had nothing to hide. Whitfield asked simple questions. Marcus answered with questions of his own, asking for details, clarifications, perfectly normal behavior for someone being questioned by a detective for the first time, and perfectly consistent behavior for someone who wanted to know exactly how much the police knew. What Whitfield took away from that conversation wasn't any concrete evidence. It was an impression, and Ray Whitfield deeply distrusted impressions. But this one was hard to shake. Marcus Thompson seemed scared, not of the detective, not of the investigation, not of the legal consequences of anything. Scared of himself. It was subtle, easy to miss if you didn't know what to look for. But Whitfield had 22 years of experience reading what people's faces do when they're trying not to show what they feel. And what Marcus showed, in the seconds when the mask slipped, was the deepest fear Whitfield had ever seen. Not the fear of getting caught, but the fear of himself. The investigation reached the limit of what the legal process allowed, without more concrete evidence. Whitfield knew he didn't have enough for a warrant. He knew what he had was circumstantial, coincidental, and entirely inadequate for any formal action. But there was something else Whitfield knew. Something he wrote down in his personal notebook and never put into any official report. There were scratches on the inside doorknob of the front door of Marcus's house. Scratches that looked like they'd been made from the inside out, with something that wasn't human fingernails. The last documented night happened when the moon was at its most visible peak, huge and white over the Coconino Plateau, pouring down light that made the shadows of the pines geometrically perfect against the snow. It was the kind of night that makes people stop and look up, that ancient instinct to recognize that something exists far bigger than anything we've built. And it was on exactly that night that 3 different witnesses, at 3 separate points around the neighborhood where Marcus lived, reported the same thing in separate calls to the police. The first call came from a woman walking her dog near the park. The dog stopped, refused to keep going, and started making a sound she described as unlike anything she'd heard from the animal in 8 years. Not barking, not a growl, but something between the two. A sound she immediately read as pure, instinctive fear. She herself felt something before she saw anything. A presence, as she told the dispatcher who took the call, struggling to find words for something that had no words, an awareness that there was something in the shadows between the trees that knew she was there. Then she saw the figure. From behind at first, and from behind, it could have been a man. The height was right. The upright posture was right. But the shoulders were too wide in a way that didn't add up, and there was something wrong with the way the head tilted, as if the anatomy of the neck were slightly different from what it should be. When the figure turned, not quickly, but with the slow deliberateness of something that isn't afraid of being seen because it knows whoever sees it won't be able to do anything about it, the woman described what Whitfield, reading the report later, immediately recognized. The same eyes the drivers had mentioned. Human. Full of something she identified as pain. The second call came from a teenager who was on his porch. The third, from an elderly man who lived at the edge of the neighborhood bordering the forest and who, according to him, had woken up to a sound he couldn't quite describe. Not exactly a howl, not exactly a human scream, but something that contained elements of both in a way that made the sound feel fundamentally wrong. Like a musical note played a half step off from where it should be. Whitfield arrived in the neighborhood 22 minutes after the first call. He found the 3 witnesses, took their statements, walked to the tree line with a flashlight. He found marks on the ground identical to the ones on Highway 89. He found a scrap of orange fabric caught on a branch at human shoulder height. Then, about 150 feet into the forest, he found something that made him stop completely and stand still for a length of time he himself couldn't quantify afterward. There was an area on the ground where the snow was pressed down in a way that suggested someone or something actually had knelt there for a long time. And in the center of that area, pressed down with enough force to sink several inches into the packed snow, were the marks of two hands. Human hands, judging by the shape of the palms, but with claw marks at the fingertips, and around the handprints, a pattern Whitfield recognized after a moment, marks from knees and a forehead. The position of someone curled in on themselves, head down, hands pressed against the ground. The position of someone fighting, not with another person, with himself. Marcus Thompson disappeared the following morning. There's no record of his leaving, no plane ticket purchased, no luggage visibly packed, no notice given to his job or his mother, who called 3 days later when the Sunday phone calls stopped coming. The Coconino County Sheriff's Office filed a missing persons report. The investigation found no evidence of a crime. The file was logged as an open case, no active resolution. Bureaucratic language for saying there's nothing more to be done without new information. Ray Whitfield retired a few months later. Not due to pressure, not due to scandal. He simply reached the time for it. But those who worked with him in the months before his retirement noticed he developed a new habit, checking the moon phases on the calendar every morning when he got to work. He never mentioned it. He just checked, wrote something down in his personal notebook, and went on with his day. The notebook stayed with him. Nobody knows what was written in it. The residents of the neighborhood where the last sightings occurred went through something psychologists would call collective trauma response, but that they themselves described more simply. They became afraid of the dark in a way they hadn't been since childhood. Not the abstract fear adults have, the kind that knows, rationally, that the odds of something bad happening are low. The visceral physical fear of a child, the kind that makes you not want to put a foot outside the bed because you're certain something is waiting underneath it. The fear you don't choose to have. The fear that has you. There's a question none of the police reports ask directly, but that's implicit in every gap, in every piece of evidence that leads nowhere, in every statement describing the same human eyes full of the same unbearable pain. If Marcus Thompson was the creature, and the circumstantial evidence points with an insistence that's hard to ignore toward that conclusion, then Marcus Thompson knew what he was becoming. He knew. He fought against it. And he kept waking up every morning and going to work and calling his mother on Sundays, as if normalcy were an anchor he wasn't ready to let go of. What does that say about the nature of what he was? About the line between monster and man? If that line even exists as cleanly and clearly as we'd like it to? The werewolf of old stories was always presented as a curse. Something that happened to you. Something imposed from outside. But what Marcus Thompson's eyes suggested to the witnesses who described them with such consistency was different. It wasn't the expression of something possessed. It was the expression of something still present, still conscious, still responsible. And precisely because of that, utterly terrified. The forests around Flagstaff are vast. The pines grow dense enough to create a darkness at midday that makes the line between the national park and the unknown feel a lot less solid than the maps suggest. On full moon nights, when the light comes down at an angle through the branches and creates that cold glow that doesn't warm anything but lights everything with an almost surgical clarity, residents of certain streets near the edge of the forest still occasionally report a sound coming from the direction of the trees. Not exactly a howl, not exactly a human scream. Something between the two. Nobody is going to investigate. The case is closed. The file is archived. And Marcus Thompson is somewhere that no police report, no security camera, and no 22-year veteran detective ever managed to reach. Whether he's still the man who paid his taxes and called his mother, or whether he's something else entirely, or whether he's both at once in a way our language still doesn't have words for, that question went unanswered. And maybe that's exactly why it won't go away. Some stories don't end. Some stories simply stop, and you're left standing outside, looking at the place where they walked into the darkness, waiting for a sound that may never come again, or waiting with a fear you never asked to feel for it to come.